Peace, family. It's your brother Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Night School. Every night here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we have a conversation, a classroom, a global classroom is what we do here. It ain't a podcast, it's not a TV show. It is a global classroom. And here tonight on Night School, we got a bunch of stuff to talk about, a bunch of things that I want to help break down for y'all. And we also got a couple of questions and answers from the audience who want to push me a little bit, who want to challenge me a little bit. Some of y'all ask questions because y'all want to know the information. Some of y'all ask the questions because y'all want to prove me wrong or throw me off. I'm down with all of them questions, and there's two at least uh, that I want to get to at the very top of the show before we even get into our conversation. But before we do that, I want to just shout out a couple people from the channel, man. Every night, Night School is growing. This program is growing every single night because of your work, because of your efforts, because of your commitment as an audience. And I just want to shout y'all out and say thank you. I'm grateful for all of y'all, but I am especially grateful for the people who are members of the channel, people who have made a financial commitment every single month to supporting the channel and to helping us do radical independent Black media. First, let me shout out Roy Nowlin, who just became a channel member. Welcome to the channel. We will give you the secret handshake and welcome you into the fold soon. I think Jazz will help you with that. Shout out to Jazz, by the way. Present and accounted for as always. Wanda Chapman, shout out to you. Kime Aboyade Acosta, Barzita Brujita, shout out to you as well. Coyote Hole, shout out to you. Rachel, so good to hear from you. Rolando DD, shout out to you. Nicole Davis, it's happy Friday, Junior. You ain't lying, yo. It has been a week, but we keep persevering. You know what I mean? We still here. Ain't that how the poem goes? Y'all might not know that poem. But it's a great poem. I used to recite it, a version of it, during my fraternity days or journey. But Langston Hughes has a poem called Still Here. I've been scarred and battered. My hopes the wind unscattered. Snow has frizzed me. Sun has baked me. Looks like between them, they done tried to make me stop laughing, stop loving, stop living. But I don't care. I'm still here. And that's us, y'all. We are still here. We still fighting. We still struggling. We still building. And we still winning. So I don't take any of that. I don't take any of that for granted, y'all. Shout out to As C. Shout out to Leslie Young. Shout out to Odette Marie. Shout out to Lil Miss 222. Shout out to Chantel Bateman. Shout out to Keenan Ballard, of course. Rose Abilities in the building. Mentioning my salt and vinegar chips, yo. I haven't eaten salt and vinegar chips tonight, but I plan to in just a minute. So let's just know that that's finna happen. Someone, shout out to you, Farrah. Shout out to you, and Keenan Ballard said Mark Late Hill. It's not my fault tonight. I had one of my staff members didn't show up, so I had to. I know y'all think I don't have a team, but I really do. It's not like an imaginary team. It's not like Snuffle Up Against or something. I got a real squad, and some squad members didn't show up for whatever reason. They had an emergency, so I had to at 10:30 reorganize everything and put everything together, pull photos and images. Because if y'all notice over the last couple of weeks, we've been getting nice with it, right? Like you got like B-roll, we got images going underneath when I'm talking. You got stories and still photos and sound on tape clips, all kinds of stuff. That's because we built the channel out with high quality staff to make the experience feel better to you all. Shout out to you, honey. I appreciate you, sister. Thank you so much. Blue Sky, shout out to you. BW, shout out to you. Chef Shayes, shout out to you. Snuffy is real, but here's the thing. I was born in the 70s, kid in the 80s. You know, when I was coming up, the only person who could see Snuffy was Big Bird. So people always walking around thinking Big Bird was crazy. People always walking around thinking Big Bird was I don't know high on something, but he wasn't. He was not, and that goes to show you Sometimes you gotta trust people, even when it seems like what they saying ain't exactly right and exact. Sometimes it be. But anyway, y'all, let's get to it. We had a question from somebody who showed up in the War on Gaza report, and he actually left a generous $10 super chat and asked the question. And I didn't want him to think that I was avoiding him. And just to be clear, Nix 2525, if I were to have avoided you, it would be because Nix is in your name, not because of the nature of your question. I hate the Nix right now. Your question was, did you consider Jordanian control of the West Bank as occupation? Genuinely interested if Palestinians considered the period of 1948-1967 as an occupation back in the day. Okay, so you say, did I consider? You mean, do I consider? Because I wasn't there. But yes, the answer is yes. Palestine, and I'm not Palestinian, so I'm not speaking for Palestinians. I'm speaking for me, but I'm also speaking for historians, and I'm speaking for the Palestinians who have spoken to me about the Jordanian occupation. You know, I've spent years in Jerusalem doing research in the Afro-Palestinian community there in particular, but I've also just spent times, you know, doing anthropological research in historic Palestine, specifically in East Jerusalem. And as you know, East Jerusalem is under Israeli occupation. It has been since 1967. But from 1948 until 1967, until the Six-Day War, it was under Jordanian occupation. And I remember one day asking one of my research participants, somebody who I spent a lot of time with, hanging with. We were sitting outside of where were we at? It doesn't matter, I guess. We were in the old city of Jerusalem. We were sitting outside of a cafe, and Damascus Gate is what I was trying to think of. And he was born in 1950. So I asked him what it was like growing up under occupation, and he said, honestly, brother, he said the Jordanians were intense, and the Jordanian occupation during my childhood was brutal. The Jordanian soldiers were brutal to us. Now, I've heard other people have different stories about how the Jordanian occupation was much milder than the Israeli occupation. That's specifically around this question of Jerusalem in general. I don't think there's any comparison between the Jordanian occupation and the Israeli occupation. Also, to be clear, after 1940, and there are people out there who are asking, and we in night school, right? So I don't have, it's not TV. I don't have to give you a quick 10-second answer. So I'm gonna give you a little more context, okay? Because I want you to understand not just my answer, but the context for my answer, but maybe potentially the context for the question. I don't want to assume the worst in Nix 2525. But oftentimes when people ask that question, what they're implying is that the Jordanian occupation of East Jerusalem and the West Bank was not criticized or challenged in the way that the Israeli occupation from 1967 until now is. In other words, they're saying the West Bank and Gaza and Sinai and Golan has been occupied since 1948, but the world is only mad when Israel occupies it. They're only mad when Jews or the Jewish state is in control of those regions. So y'all not mad at occupation, you're mad at Jewish occupation. That is often the Zionist argument. And oftentimes people who ask that question are asking it as a way of advancing that claim. Let me say that such a claim is not accurate on its face, right? The world, no one was happy about a military occupation of East Jerusalem. Palestinians weren't running around saying, yay, we're under military occupation by Jordan in 1948 to 1967. But the difference was, well, there are several differences. One, the conditions on the ground were different. I mean, I know Palestinians right now, born in 1950, born in 1955, born in 1958, born in 1966, who have Jordanian passports. Why do they have Jordanian passports? Well, because the region was under Jordanian occupation. So Jordan was at least granting citizenship and allowing for a certain kind of belonging legally at the juridical or legal level. Palestinians been under Israeli occupation for now, what's the longest occupation in modern history, 57 years, 57 years, excuse me. And they don't get Israeli passports. But look, I'm not looking for warmer and fuzzier occupiers or warmer and fuzzier colonizers. That's not what I'm talking about. Barcita Brujita says colonizers are colonizers, period. I agree. I agree. The important point here to note, though, is that Jordanians were not colonizers. The West Bank and Gaza, excuse me, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, not Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem fell under Jordanian control after the 1948 war, after the Nakba. And the default position of the Arab world at the time was to restore or to return all of historic Palestine, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, from the window to the wall. The idea was to return all of it to the Palestinian people. There were deals being struck behind the scenes and sometimes in very public discourse between the Kingdom of Jordan and the Israeli government. There was a sort of global or pan-Arab commitment to not recognizing Israel in 1940 and 1967. So the idea, the belief of the Arab world then was that they would be victorious over Israel, and that ultimately they would be successful in returning Palestine and the rest of the region to its rightful owners. I'm using rightful owners just as a way of framing how different people talked about it. 1967 war happens and things change. The 1967 war happens and Israel doesn't lose. It's a 6-day war, and it's a thorough defeat of Israel's surrounding Arab neighbors. Now, the Zionist narrative is that Israel was sneak attacked by the Arabs and they beat them all with one hand tied behind their back. In truth, Israel was the aggressor, and history has proven that. Israel has thoroughly corroborated the argument with a claim. There's no serious scholar that would say that Israel didn't strike first. Now Israel has, so much so that Israel now doesn't even say that it was responding in self-defense. They just say that it was preemptive self-defense. We knew they were coming, so we struck first. But Israel gained a lot of land. But at that moment, the global community also was like, hey, enough fighting, enough war. We can no longer assume or accept as a political reality that Israel's territorial integrity won't be acknowledged. And also, we don't want more violence. And so you saw 2 UN resolutions, Resolution 338 and Resolution 242. 242 was about the territorial integrity of Israel. 338 was about the end of belligerency, right? So no more war, one resolution, and Israel's territorial integrity must be acknowledged. By the way, respecting Israel's territorial integrity was what the right to exist initially meant. So when you hear Martin Luther King say, I respect Israel's right to exist, he wasn't talking about as a Jewish state. He wasn't talking about as an ethno state. He wasn't talking about as an apartheid state. He was talking about its right. He's basically saying you can't go, you have to respect the borders of the nation, just like every other nation. That became the default position of the Arab world. And from that point forward, there was a different sort of response to occupation, not because because part of the UN resolution was also to return lands that were taken in the war. So the idea was, yeah, we acknowledge Israel's right to exist, but we also are going to give the land back to the people whose territory was occupied. If Israel had given back the West Bank, if Israel had given back the Sinai and the Golan, if Israel had given back East Jerusalem, if Israel had given back Gaza, there would have been a very different global response. But there also would have been a very different set of political possibilities with regard to the formation of a Jewish state. So all of that is the reason why we see a sort of different response by the international community for the Jordanian occupation of 1948 to 1967 and the Palestinian occupation, which is from 1967 until forever, as of now, right? There's no signs of letting up, and the Netanyahu government is not claiming that they're letting it go. And the nation state law that emerged, I guess now 6 years ago in Israel, declared all of historic Palestine, all of Eretz Israel to be the Jewish peoples. In other words, the West Bank is ours, Gaza is ours, Golan's ours, Sinai's ours, East Jerusalem's ours. International law be damned. And so it's not just an abstract or philosophical endorsement of, maybe not endorsement, but a certain kind of a differential analysis or embrace of the Jordanian occupation versus the Israeli occupation. It's not that the world was like, yes, occupy, but military occupations are supposed to be temporary. By definition, they're temporary. And Israel showed no signs of letting up back then. Even Martin Luther King said, I suspect they're never going to let go of East Jerusalem. And now 57 years later, Israel still hasn't. And so we see the realities of it. And that's what we need to talk and we need to think about a little bit more. So that's the answer to your questions. I hope that answered your question. If it was a sincere question, I think I gave you a thorough answer. If it was an insincere question, you may never be happy. Now, you could have a sincere question and disagree with me. I'm not saying like only if you're sincere, that means I'm right. I just mean I hope you saw my answer as responsive to your question. So thank you. Appreciate y'all. All right, let's get on to some of the stories of the day. I want to talk about a couple of the stories of the day, and I'll take some more questions at the end. If you have a question that's not on the topic that we're talking about, or if you have a question that will take a while, I do ask that you sort of wait toward the end of night school so that I can see it, or send it as a super chat. We always love when you support the channel by sending it as a super chat or as a super sticker, because I see it, it stays up top. And of course, I'm committed to answering anyone who sends one of those. All right. So let's talk about a few other topics that have been just buzzing in recent days. And there are a lot. One of the things I want to do at night school, just as an aside, before we move on to the stories, is I don't want this to feel like a news show, because that's not what I'm trying to do. I really mean that when I say it's not a news show, it's not a podcast, it's a global classroom. We're going to talk about some stuff that's happening in the world, but I want to break it down with a deeper level of analysis. It's really important to me that we do that. So what you'll see now moving forward is likely fewer stories, but deeper analysis. Because I think that's what night school should be about. Some nights there's only going to be one story, and I'm just going to drill down on that one story. Right? A black U.S. airman is killed in his own home. Oh my God, I'm so tired, family, of having to share these types of stories, because they happen way more often than they should. It's not the first or the second or the third time where I feel like we have reported a story like this in my recent years in news, and I've been in news for 20 years, but I'm talking about recent news. And this one is no less disturbing than all the other ones that we've heard. The Okaloosa County Sheriff's, this is very frustrating to me for a few reasons. But let's talk about it, all right? Body camera video shows a Florida deputy fatally shot a U.S. airman in his own apartment. The Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office released body cam footage capturing the moment that a deputy shot and killed a black senior airman in his apartment. 23-year-old Roger Fortson was at his off-base apartment in the crib by himself when he heard a knock on the door. Now, he didn't expect anybody. He wasn't expecting company. So he asked who it was. Nobody responds. Now, he's a military man. He's cautious of dangers. He has no idea what's going on, but something doesn't seem right to him. So he went to look in the peephole. He looks in the peephole. He can't see anybody. So imagine you're in your crib. You hear not just a knock, by the way, an aggressive knock at the door. This wasn't like a, pizza. This was a hard knock on the door. And after the hard knock, He asks who it is. No one responds. He then goes to the peephole. He looks in the peephole. Nobody is there. So now he's like, I don't know if there's a prank. I don't know if this is an intruder. I don't know if I'm getting set up for something. I mean, all the possibilities are endless. I'm not saying what was in his mind. I can't tell you what was in his mind, but I can tell you how most people would respond or react to this type of thing. So he goes and retrieves his gun. Now, again, he's a upstanding citizen, as they say. He has a legally registered weapon, and he goes to get it because he's concerned. He's a little afraid for his safety. As he's getting his gun, there are more knocks on the door, and knocks are getting more aggressive. So he's trying to figure out what's happening. Before he can do anything else, police bust through his door. They just bust in the door, and they see him holding his gun. His name again is Roger Fortson. Roger Fortson is now standing there, holding his gun by his side. He doesn't raise the gun. He's not pointing it at police, but he has the gun in his hand again because people were banging on his door and hiding away from the people. Well, the police see a black guy with a gun, and they shoot him 6 times. They're screaming at him to, lose the weapon or, give up the gun. He's like, I don't have it. It's over there. This is after they shot him. And he dies. 23-year-old Roger Fortson dies. Now, according to Benjamin Crump, the family attorney, who you all probably know, Mr. Fortson was on FaceTime with his girlfriend during the entire incident. And we all have those moments. You're talking to a friend, or a loved one or a significant other, and you're on the FaceTime and the police pull you over. You're like, yo, stay right here. I want you to watch or hear this. Or, yo, we talking. It's like, yo, somebody's at my door. So, someone crazy. I'm getting my gun. Yo, it's like, well, stay here with me. His girlfriend's on the phone with him. She has to see part of and hear all of her boyfriend's death sequence. Now, of course, I can't imagine what she's going through. I can't imagine what she's dealing with. But according to her, she says she believes that the deputy entered the wrong apartment. They were looking for one person, and they got somebody else. Now, for their, I don't want to say credit, but from their perspective, the sheriff's office said they didn't have the wrong apartment. They said they were in the right place. Now, it's interesting. They say they're investigating. The deputy who shot him, we don't know the deputy's name, by the way. We don't know the deputy's name. Police go to great lengths to protect officers who kill people. Whether they're innocent, whether they're guilty, whether they're right, whether they're wrong, I can't speak to. But what I know for sure is, regardless of who they are or how they are, police make sure, they make sure that name ain't leaked until the absolute last second possible. So they put the guy on administrative leave. That means he's paid. And I'm not saying he shouldn't be paid. As a union person, I don't want to create a precedent where people don't get paid when they're on leave, disciplinary leave, or when they're being investigated, because that could hurt a whole lot of people, not just police. Now, the Okaloosa County Sheriff, Eric Aden, said the shooting is being investigated by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the state attorney's office. This is important because normally when police get involved in shootings, police investigate themselves. Internal affairs from the police department investigates. The superior officer, the ranking officer, the officer on call will be involved in the early investigation, and then the higher ups in that department or in that district or in that precinct will be involved in the longer term investigation. But the problem is, police investigating themselves is pointless. I've been part of one of those investigations when I sued the police department. What they do is they ask me my statement, what happened? And I say, Officer Smith did X, Y, and Z. Then they take my statement with all the details. Then they bring it to Officer Smith. They let Officer Smith read my statement and then respond to what I said. So if I say, Officer Smith called me a nigger and hit me with a brick, right? He'll read that and go, um, now he's not writing a formal response to my statement. He just gets to read my statement. And no, then they'll say, Officer Smith, what happened? He'll say, well, you know, I was walking down the street. I saw Marc Lamont Hill, and I heard someone yell the N word. I turned around. It was some random person behind me. Um, and then I saw Marc Lamont Hill pick up a Death Star, and so I pulled up, and I didn't want to shoot him, so I picked up a brick to protect myself from the Death Star. Like that's how it goes, right? It's a very police-centered, police accommodating process. That's just the reality of it. So the fact that it's being handled by an outside agency is very, very important. And the county sheriff said, these investigations take time. We're going to give transparency and accountability. He promised transparency and accountability. He said, but these investigations take time. But I want to assure you that we are not hiding, covering up, or taking any action that would result in a rushed judgment of Mr. Fortson or our deputy. I don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but that's the right response, right? We're going to investigate this thing and we're going to tell the truth about it. I'm good with that. Now, but here's what's funky. Here's what's funky about this. They have body camera footage. They have surveillance technologies that allow us to see what happened. The police show up at this apartment complex, which is Mr. Fortson's apartment complex. And the police get taken to an elevator by a random witness. I don't know who the witness is. They haven't said who the witness is. But imagine this. Witness takes the police to the elevator and says, hey, I'm hearing fighting from an apartment. The witness, I don't know what apartment the witness said. I don't know if the witness mentioned Roger Fortson's apartment or if he mentioned another apartment, if he said something was going on. But remember, Mr. Fortson is in the house alone. The only person he's talking to is on FaceTime. He's talking to his girl on FaceTime. And they're clearly not having an argument. So whatever noise or disturbance they heard in that building wasn't coming from him. It just doesn't make sense. And so the deputy then approaches the front door, knocks, and twice says, sheriff's office. Now, it's clear if you're hiding behind the keyhole and Mr. Fortson doesn't hear you, just hears the knocking, the aggressive knocking, etc. It says Fortson was seen holding a gun in his right hand as he opened the door. The deputy then fired multiple shots as soon as the door opened, telling him to afterwards to drop the weapon. And again, like I told you before, he said, it's over there. I don't have it. So is this just a mistake? Is this just a coincidence? I know some of you are watching this and you're thinking, well, if I were a police officer and I showed up to the crib and somebody opened the door with a gun, I'd fire first. I'd squeeze first, ask questions last too. Here's my response to you. That's why you shouldn't be a police officer. Police officers aren't supposed to do what we do. They're supposed to do what trained police officers do. And a trained police officer has to have a better strategy than walking up to a random house, which they clearly misidentified. Because again, either the witness gave them bad information or the police went to the wrong door. One of those got to be true. And he knocks on the door, and then suddenly you had a gang of police that were just going to bust into somebody's crib because they heard a disturbance. Even if there was an argument, if me and my cousin are in the crib arguing and we're having a shouting match, the police don't bust into the crib with guns drawn. And clearly the police had guns drawn because Mr. Fortson had his gun by his side. And when he opened the door, the police immediately started shooting. That means the police showed up to that house with guns drawn. Why would the police be showing up to this U.S. Airman's house with guns drawn? This feels like something far simpler. The police went to the wrong house. They thought they were breaking up something crazy. They went to the wrong house. They saw a Negro with a gun and they lost their minds. The other thing I want to say about this, though, the response to this shooting, like Botham Jean and others who've been killed in their own homes, or even people like Henry Louis Gates, professor at Harvard, who was arrested walking into his own home. Allegedly, they thought he was breaking into his own crib. The response is going to be that this guy was special. In fact, in a press conference, Benjamin Crump, my dear friend and brother, says about Mr. Fortson, he was a patriot. He was a U.S. Airman, special ops. He was fighting for our way of life. He was fighting for everybody. Now, Benjamin Crump is an attorney, not a political analyst or activist. He's a brilliant attorney who loves Black people, who loves oppressed people, who is fighting for the liberation of everybody. Shout out to Ben Crump. This is not a criticism of Benjamin Crump per se. I don't agree with, he was fighting for our way of life. He was, the military. I mean, the military does defend the American way of life, but that's imperialism. But that's not where I'm going with this. I just don't want to reinforce that narrative. We're not, or let it go unchallenged. My point is, yes, he was a patriot. Yes, he was a U.S. Airman Special Ops. Yes, if the police knew that, they wouldn't have shot him. Yes, we can construct a super deep stars and stripes American romanticism. We can create a whole romantic narrative around him easily, effortlessly, in fact. Not a problem at all. But I think it does us a greater disservice. It'll help us advance this story. And there is a way that when we show a Black person who played by the rules, a Black person who got fancy degree. I remember when Mike Brown was killed. Sorry. I remember when Mike Brown was killed and people were saying he was starting college on Monday. Now, I'm not sure Mike Brown was starting college on Monday based on my research. But what I know is even if Mike Brown had been starting college on Monday, that doesn't make his life more or less valuable. When we show Trayvon Martin on a horse, the fact that he was on a horse doesn't make George Zimmerman's killing of him any more or less despicable. I don't want to reinforce the narrative that vulnerable people, that Black people, poor people, trans people, women, anybody who's vulnerable within a particular context only deserves our grief and our emotional investments and our political defense if they are the right kind of victim. Now, this guy, of course, the media loves great narratives, right? The media loves to spin a story. So yeah, of course, a U.S. airman getting killed is easier to sell than a Blood or a Crip, a gang member getting killed by police in the same situation. But if we embrace that narrative too firmly, if we normalize that narrative too much, then we reinforce the idea that some people are disposable and other people are not. And that is that's something that we can't reinforce. So yes, I'm shouting out this story. I am going to tell the truth about this story, and I'm going to fight for justice. I'm going to help fight for justice for this young man, 23 years old. I have children that age. Roger Fortson deserves all of that. But Roger Fortson would deserve it even if he dropped out of high school, even if he were a drug addict, even if he were unhoused, even if it was his trans boyfriend or girlfriend or non-binary friend on the FaceTime instead of a socially legible Black girl or white girl, whatever she was. We can't have picks out here. We got to fight for everybody, including the most vulnerable. So for those of you who are going to advance the story as media people, or those of you who are going to advance the story as activists, it's okay to use it because it creates a spectacle for the public consumption, right? The world is going to look at this and go, "Oh my God, what just happened?" Because they have to reckon with this story. They have to find a way to make sense of it. But please, y'all, please don't let that be the only story that we tell, and don't reinforce or allow other people to reinforce a very dangerous, very dangerous narrative. All right, let's move on to talk about Israel just for a second. There's been so much conversation about what's been going on campuses, and I got more to say about that too. But I want to talk just a little bit about what Netanyahu is up to these days. For months, Israel and its leader, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have promised a ground invasion in Rafah. Rafah, for those that don't know, is a southern city in Gaza where almost everybody in the Gaza Strip is currently situated. It's a town that holds 250,000 people, but right now it holds 1.5 million, maybe even more Palestinians who have been forced to flee the north, forced to flee the central part of Gaza. 1.7 out of Gaza's 2.2 million people are currently unhoused. Most are facing food insecurity and the looming threat of famine, if not outright famine. And so Rafah is a city where there's a lot of tension, a lot of vulnerability, a lot of precarity. Netanyahu has said, we're going to invade Rafah. We're going to have a ground invasion. I'm talking about tanks and troops, mortars, all the stuff. We're going to invade Rafah as a way of defeating Hamas. That's the argument. He's so committed to invading Rafah that he said, even if there is a ceasefire deal, the ceasefire deal cannot prohibit me from invading Rafah. What kind of ceasefire allows you to invade and bomb another city in the middle of it? That's not do you know what ceasefire means? Anyway, for months, the global community has said, no, this is a bad idea. Even Israel's closest allies like Germany, which co-signs everything Israel does, has said, look, this is a humanitarian crisis. The UN is right. Human Rights Watch is right. This organization, that organization, they're right. We will have an almost inconceivably bleak humanitarian crisis if you invade Rafah right now. Let's work toward a peace agreement. But Netanyahu refuses. He's been so stubborn that even Joe Biden has said, we can't help you no more, bro. Now, I'm not being dramatic or overstating this. Just the other day, US President Joe Biden says to Israel publicly, not these backdoor conversations that get leaked, not these Antony Blinken's, Secretary of State, sound bites that get interpreted in ways that make them seem more firm than they actually are. No, I'm talking about Joe Biden publicly said that we cannot supply weapons to the Israeli government that are going to be used in Rafah. This week was the first week where no munitions arrived that could be used to kill Gazans inside of the city of Rafah. This was a big deal. Now, as I said yesterday, let's not romanticize or over-celebrate what Joe Biden did. Let's not overstate the importance of what he did, because the U.S. has given Israel way more weapons than they could ever use right now to eliminate Hamas or to eliminate all the Palestinian people or to leverage their force to ethnically cleanse the Strip. They can do all kinds of stuff. U.S. has done enough, and they're not changing their fundamental position. They're still supporting Israel. They're still probably going to veto the next attempt at Palestinian statehood in the UN. They're still sending money. They're still sending humanitarian aid. But when you're used to getting everything you want, like you're like a spoiled kid, even the slightest bit of resistance, even a small no, even a mini no, sends you to the moon. And that's exactly what happened today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he responded to the United States' refusal to send them more weapons to bomb and invade Rafah. Benjamin Netanyahu stands up and he says to the global community, we're all by ourselves now. We didn't need the United States anyway. We don't want those problems. He didn't actually say that, but here's what he did say. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed that Israel, quote, will stand alone in their attack on Rafah. In a video that was released earlier today, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, quote, "Today we are much stronger. We are determined. We are united in order to defeat our enemies and those who want to destroy us." Now, of course, as I noted, the Prime Minister's statements are in response to President Biden's decision to not send shipments of weapons to Israel if they choose to invade Rafah. So Prime Minister Netanyahu had two choices. He could have looked at the global response to his invasion as a sign to stop. He could have said, wait a minute, we literally have had the perpetual support of the United States since the 60s, easily. We have had the nonstop support of Germany for decades, France for decades, Canada for decades. Even human rights organizations that typically oppose war and are critical of Israel have still said Israel has a right to self-defense. Those organizations have nonetheless said, wait a minute, what's about to happen in Rafah is far from self-defense. It's going to create a humanitarian crisis, and it's unnecessary and avoidable. Ceasefire now. Netanyahu could have heard all of that and said, you know what? Let me take the ceasefire agreement. Let me say we're done for now. Or he could take door number two. Keep on fighting. And guess what Netanyahu chose? He chose door number two. Today, we are much stronger. We are determined, and we are united in order to defeat our enemies and those who want to destroy us. Now, I don't know what the difference is between enemies and those who want to destroy us, but it's very clear that Netanyahu is saying, look, we're on a single mission. It's just us against the world, and we're fine with that. What Jay-Z say on that Drake verse? The homie said, hope it ain't many of us, less is more, it's plenty of us. That's what Netanyahu's saying. He's like, fine, US, you bailing too? We're going to ride solo. And when he said to defeat our enemies, with that Tupac inflection, he's saying Hamas, he's saying Hezbollah, minimum, right? But at this point, I don't know who he's talking about. In addition to those organizations, is he talking about the broader state of Iran? Is he talking about the Ansar Allah, the what you people call Houthis in Yemen? Is he willing to wage a global or even regional full-scale war now that he's got this sense of isolation that is not stopping him from invading? He's not like, I'm alone, we ain't got the backup. He said, I'm alone, F it, let's just go. And that kind of commitment, I mean, the most generous read is that he really believes Israel is constantly under perpetual attack, and this is the only way they'll be safe, or that this is an urgent existential necessity. But the evidence doesn't support that hypothesis. The evidence supports the hypothesis that Netanyahu has two missions right now. One is a deeply embedded political Zionist commitment to full Israeli control over all of historic Palestine. He's seeing this moment as an opportunity to further empty the Gaza Strip, to expand settlements in the West Bank, and to basically intensify and expand Israel's control of all of what it calls Eretz Israel. Then the second thing is Netanyahu don't want to go to jail. Benjamin Netanyahu is facing significant criminal charges, and it is very likely that Netanyahu will end up in prison the moment he steps out of the prime minister seat. And what's the best way to stay in office as a head of state? Be a wartime president, be a wartime prime minister, be a wartime chancellor, be whatever the job is, be a wartime version. People don't like to change leadership during war. People are afraid during war. People are closing ranks during war. And while Netanyahu certainly has opposition, I mean, you can see liberal Zionists all marching through Tel Aviv. They be showing up at his house. They be showing up, speaking out against the war and demanding the return of hostages and calling for Netanyahu's job. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but whatever Netanyahu is experiencing right now, in terms of political opposition, will be a fraction compared to what he would receive if he were to step out of office. So he has a commitment to continuing this. He knows that by invading Rafah, which is going to be met by significant Hamas opposition, we already see it, right? Hamas is already firing mortars back at Israel because Israeli tanks are in the middle of Rafah, forcing people out. He knows that this is going to produce a kind of response that will allow the war to go on. We've had wars in Gaza recently. In the last 10 years, we've had several. They last like 10 days, 20 days, 30 days. We're on day 215, 216 as of today. And by the way, if you want a full analysis of this, please check out the War on Gaza report that I do every day right here on the Marc Lamont Hill official channel. I want to cover one more story before we take a quick break. And it's related to this story, and that is Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton. Every 4 years or so, Hillary Clinton shows up and makes some people feel anxious. Is she going to take over the party again? Is she going to reassume control of leadership? Is she going to run for president again? Make some people hopeful, like, oh, can we vindicate Hillary's loss to Trump in 2016 and make her president finally? And some people just like to see her so they can vote shame other people. Oh my God, if Hillary were president, we wouldn't be going through this. Yes, we would. Yes, we would. Oh, yes, we would. But that's neither here nor there. Hillary Clinton recently appeared on Morning Joe on MSNBC, and her commentary was directly connected to the ongoing war in Gaza. What does Hillary Clinton think about the current war in Gaza? I mean, that's a question that, frankly, nobody wants to know the answer to. But somehow, the former Secretary of State still decided that she needed to weigh in on Israel's ongoing genocidal military campaign. Here's what she said.
I have had many conversations, as you have had, with a lot of young people over the last many months now. And you're right, they don't know very much at all about the history of the Middle East, or frankly about history in many areas of the world, including in our own country.
So Hillary Clinton had an opportunity to talk about the student protest movement. Hillary Clinton had an opportunity to talk about the student protest movement, specifically sort of who these young people are and what they're doing. Now, I understand as a mainstream centrist politician, you can't just say free Palestine. I understand at a moment where, actually at every moment, the Clintons, and specifically Hillary Clinton, has had a bullseye on her. I mean, for all the reasons. People hate the Clintons, people are sexist, people just don't like her, and all the legitimate harm the Clintons have done. There's all the things at once. No, I'm not disputing any of that. But Hillary Clinton had an opportunity right now to at least temper her remarks or balance her remarks or have a complicated, interesting, nuanced analysis. And we can do that on Morning Joe. Professor Eddie Glaude from Princeton University does it all the time. He goes out there, he doesn't give a 10-second answer. He gives a long, sophisticated, thoughtful, articulate answer that actually invokes left-wing critique, left-wing analysis, progressive, radical politics. You can do that. The problem is that ain't who Hillary Clinton is. So instead, Hillary Clinton says this thing that, frankly, is indefensible in terms of how she's talking about these young campus protesters in American colleges and universities. I want to play Hillary's comments, these comments, we just played. I want to play it again so that you can hear it again. I want to break this down just a little bit more. Listen to this.
I have had many conversations, as you have had, with a lot of young people over the last many months now. And you're right, they don't know very much at all about the history of the Middle East, or frankly, about history in many areas of the world, including in our own country.
What an unnecessary, smug, and largely inaccurate analysis of our young people, and disingenuous, I might add. Again, there are young people on college campuses right now who are declaring the necessity of divestment. They're saying, university, we need you to divest. We pay tuition dollars. We're part of the campus community. We demand that you divest from Israel's vicious occupation, Israel's vicious apartheid, Israel's human rights violations, and Israel's present genocidal military campaign in Gaza. Divest now. She makes no significant analysis of what those young people are doing. She doesn't speak to their bravery, their courage, their consistency, or their moral their moral character. Nah. She simply frames them as young people who don't know history, or they don't know Middle Eastern history, they don't know American history. First of all, this generation of young people is more informed about these issues than my generation was, and I suspect Secretary Clinton more informed than your generation was. When you all, I mean, because let's be honest, right? All of these uh, politicians right now who are in the mix for the presidential race. I'm talking about the Bidens and the Trumps and the Clintons. They are all of the Vietnam War era, right? Hillary Clinton was in her teens and 20s when the Vietnam War broke out. And I don't know what Hillary's most treasured and deep down honest politics are, but I do know that her peers, her friends, her community, even when she was a conservative, they, many people were calling for an end to Vietnam. Did you characterize them? Would you characterize your generation as uninformed, not knowing history, blind to Asian politics? Right? I mean, that's basically what you're saying, right? Is like, oh well, they don't, almost like they don't know enough to be talking about it, because these young people in 1968, they just don't know. I mean, imagine Hillary Clinton at 21 years old watching the uprisings at Columbia University, in 1968, 56 years ago, and saying they don't know anything about Southeast Asian history. Why are they fight? Why are they protesting this war? You know what? I don't need to know everything there is to know about Southeast Asian politics to know that the Vietnam War was wrong, and to know that people were dying. Would you say Martin Luther King wasn't a sufficient enough political analyst of Vietnam to be able to say this war in Vietnam was wrong? Of course not. You wouldn't say that about Dr. King, Hillary. Why are you saying it about his children? Why are you saying it about his followers? Why are you saying it about his peers? Right? Wouldn't make sense. So now let's fast forward to this moment in history. Maybe these young people don't know everything there is to know about Middle Eastern history and politics. It takes a long time to become a scholar of that area. You're a Secretary of State. Of course, you have a deep policy knowledge and deep historical knowledge of this issue. You should. But we don't have to be experts to know that 35,000 dead Palestinians in Gaza, 2/3 of whom are women and children, is too many. We don't have to be experts to know that killing 1% of the child population in Gaza is too many. We don't have to be experts to know that 1.7 million out of 2.2 million Gazan residents being unhoused as a result of the war is too many. We can know that 8,000 dead bodies under the rubble still is too many. We can look at this war on Gaza with clear eyes. even if we're not experts. However, if you are an expert, expert analysis would suggest that these kids are right. The scholars, the policy experts, the experts on genocide, the experts on international law, all affirm that Israel has gone too far in some place or another. I'm not saying they all said October 8th was wrong or October 12th was wrong, but they have certainly talked about the bombing of hospitals, the destruction of schools and masjids. They've talked about the devastation of civil society, the destruction of universities. They've talked about using food and water as a weapon, starvation and dehydration as a weapon, food insecurity as a weapon. They've talked about the blocking of humanitarian aid. They've talked about the looming crisis or maybe even worse than a crisis that will emerge if Rafah is invaded, as Netanyahu has consistently promised and has begun to do, taking over the border and now rolling in with tanks and troops. Hillary Clinton, these young people may not have PhDs or MAs in Middle Eastern history, but they can certainly see that this is wrong. And so does international legal courts, international criminal courts, international courts of justice, international humanitarian organizations, international human rights lawyers, scholars of genocide, as I said, Doctors Without Borders, World Central Kitchen. We go on and on. Everybody's saying this is wrong, and these young people are saying this is wrong, and let's do something about it. Let's stop the war, just like you did in your generation, or at least some people did in your generation, Madam Clinton. Why diss the kids like that? Why diss the kids like that? But it's also a disingenuous argument. If the kids all got PhDs and were marching with the exact same information, with the exact same positions, but with more degrees and more expertise on the matter, you wouldn't affirm them. And conversely, there's a bunch of Zionist students who march and don't know a thing. Pro-Palestinian students, pro-Israeli students, across the board, both sides often are not sufficiently informed about the topic, but they know the values that they're trying to uphold. They know the political vision they're trying to maintain or embody or realize. But I guarantee you, when there was a march in DC after October 7th, remember the big march that Van Jones on people spoke at? And they booed his ass. There were a lot of people out there who were uninformed. I ain't heard Hillary Clinton say, oh, these Zionists or the pro-Israel lobby is often uninformed of Palestinian history or of regional history or American policy history. I ain't never heard her say that. I've never heard her critique the Israel lobby or representatives in the United States of the Israel lobby as being uninformed. So either you think that only pro-Palestinians are uninformed, or this ain't about being uninformed. Ms. Clinton, this is not. This is about you consistently discrediting the legitimacy of Palestinian freedom, liberation, and self-determination. When Hillary ran for president unsuccessfully, when she spoke about Israel, excuse me, I dropped something. When Hillary Clinton spoke about Israel when she was running for president, her talking points were the same as Donald Trump's. Them two couldn't have been more at odds. They couldn't have been more committed to fighting each other, except when it came to talking about free market capitalism. And when it came to reading them APAC talking points on both fronts, Hillary Clinton was in line. She was in formation. You thought Beyonce was there. So this is no surprise, but it just didn't have to happen. Hillary Clinton could have just said nothing. She could have sat there and ate her food. Anyway, Hillary Clinton said something else. Let's move on to another story. Hillary Clinton's comments about Columbia protesters were not the only thing that got some people, including myself, a little rankled yesterday. While on Morning Joe, Hillary Clinton also talked about the status and the history of a two-state solution. Hear what she said.
With respect to the Middle East, they don't know that under the the bringing together of the Israelis and the Palestinians by my husband, the then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, the then head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, then the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat. An offer was made to the Palestinians for a state on 96% of the existing territory occupied by the Palestinians, with 4% of Israel to be given to reach 100% of the amount of territory that was hoped for. And this offer was made, and if Yasser Arafat had accepted it, there would have been a Palestinian state now for about 24 years.
Wow. So Hillary Clinton is continuing to advance a very popular and not entirely untrue narrative about the 2000 Camp David Summit. The 2000 Camp David Summit, which happened 7 years after the Oslo Accords, it happened in July of 2000, was perhaps the most optimism-filled negotiation for an end to the Israeli-Palestinian struggle. For those that don't know, the first Intifada, which is the first sort of major Palestinian uprising of this era, happens in 1987, and it kind of goes to 1990. Some say 91, some say 93, with the beginning of the Oslo Accords. But regardless of how you think about that wave, there's a major moment of resistance that ultimately does help us get to a moment as a global community where we have the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords were understood by some as a kind of framework for producing an ultimate two-state solution. Now, in retrospect, for some and in the moment for others, their vision was affirmed that the Oslo Accords were not going to lead to Palestinian freedom and self-determination, and that they were just a structure to separate Palestinians in Jerusalem from those in Israel, from those in the West Bank. They served to divide Palestine into Bantustans, small Bantustans, rather than a contiguous body of land, etc. But in 2000, the Oslo Accords, still fresh in people's minds, the optimism still lingering a little bit. Bill Clinton, somebody who was absolutely looking to solidify his legacy, to have a legacy moment, and it makes sense. This is last year of Clinton's presidency. He was committed to trying to come up with a final status solution to the struggle over Israel and Palestine. The story of the Camp David Accords, or excuse me, the Camp David Summit. The Camp David Accords was 1978 with Anwar Sadat and Jimmy Carter. But the summit, the Camp David Summit, was an attempt to really kind of produce a Palestinian state, divided land, etc. And everything was verbal for the most part. There's not going to be any written proposals, no written records. We're just going to talk and talk and talk until everything is decided. And then once everything is decided, we'll move on to the world and we'll talk about it. Palestinians, of course, were asking for full sovereignty. They wanted the whole West Bank. They wanted the Gaza Strip. And they were willing to consider land swaps, etc. Right? Now, the Palestinians were saying, look, the UN resolution of Resolution 181 of 1947, the UN basically partitioned the land, right? 55 to 45. And then over the course of war, Israel took 78% of the land. So there's only 22% left, right? That's not fair, but I'm saying that's what they said. This isn't my opinion right now. Palestinians said that's not fair, but we've accepted it as a fait accompli, right? It's just what it is. So now we need all the remaining land because that's what's supposed to happen. It goes back to what I talked about at the top of the show around Resolution 242, etc. Right? Resolution 242 says Israel should return all the land that was taken in the war. So anyway, all of that happens. They look like they're getting close. they look like they're going to get a deal. But according to Bill Clinton, everything was done, everything was reasonable, and Arafat, Yasser Arafat, the head of the PLO, just jumped up and left. Right, basically just like ruined the deal on purpose because he just wants to fight. He just wants to be at permanent war with Israel. He's not actually looking for a resolution. Other people who observed it say that that's a ridiculous analysis. What Hillary Clinton is saying is the former, right? That basically her husband, as she put it, Bill Clinton, could have created peace in the Middle East from the beginning, but again, those pesky, angry Arabs just wouldn't let it happen. The problem with the deal that she's referring to, just for those, again, we're in night school, so I'm breaking this stuff down. I'm not just giving you news clips. The West Bank, according to many, would have been divided in a way that would have made it discontiguous or non-contiguous. In other words, if you're going to create your own country, your own state, you don't want your land to be divided in a way where it's not contiguous. In other words, imagine if, I don't know, short people like me, decided to wage war against the U.S. government, and we won, or we reached a negotiation and we said, all right, we want our own short people state, and we said, okay, cool, give us Florida and New Orleans and Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Nevada, and California. We're good. That would make sense, right? It's a region, there's a border, they're connected. We might dispute over if I can get all of that, but the logic is there. But imagine if, as a response, the American government said, all right, we want to reach a peace deal, we want a truce, we'll give you Pennsylvania, Oregon, Illinois, and New Mexico. We'd be like, how the hell is that a country? And there's a way that what Israel was offering the Palestinians was just that, right? 3 cantons plus East Jerusalem, right? Palestinian East Jerusalem, in particular, but the question was, would the old city be involved, or would it just be all the surrounding parts of the Jerusalem governorate, but not the old city, which, obviously the struggle over the Holy Lands matters, right? And that's why Jerusalem is always such a touchy issue. It's a final status question. Palestinians wanted sovereignty over the holy sites, Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, excuse me. And they wanted anything that's on the other side of the armistice line, the green line, to be destroyed. It wasn't an unreasonable ask. Arafat's representative, who was Mahmoud Abbas, who's now the head of the PA and all the other things, said all of East Jerusalem should be Palestinian. The Jewish quarter, the Western Wall, we don't want it. We don't want to control it. Israel can have authority over it, but they can't have sovereignty over it, right? And so these debates over Jerusalem were very, very important. There were debates over the right of return. There were debates over security arrangements, right? Because again, Israel wanted to give Israel wanted Palestinians to have their own state, but they also wanted the right to have security control over significant portions of this new Palestinian state. They wanted to set up radar stations inside the state. They wanted to be able to use Palestinian airspace. They wanted troops in case of emergency. Everything's an emergency. And they also wanted Palestinians to basically be demilitarized, right? So basically, we're going to have an army, you're not. And Israel wanted to control the water. So there's like so many reasons why this deal was sucky. But Hillary Clinton, is very strategically ignoring all of that information. And I hope this information is helpful for you, because it's sort of interesting and ironic. I don't know if ironic is the word, but she's saying these young people don't know history. And then so they're cheering for the wrong team, basically. But what she's doing is playing on a belief that young people don't know history, and then trying to co-opt the narrative and tell an incomplete, dishonest, misleading narrative about the struggle for Palestinian liberation. Because as she shows when she tips her hand, proverbially, they won't know the difference anyway. So I don't know if Hillary Clinton believes what she's saying. She wasn't in the negotiations. Bill Clinton was, so maybe that's what she got out of the negotiation from Bill, or if she knows better. I don't want to make a critique of her character or make assumptions about her intentions, but what I will say is Hillary Clinton could have said nothing. Hillary Clinton could have said nothing. Hillary Clinton could have walked away. Hillary Clinton could have taken a step back and just said, these young people on campus is fighting for justice. They are struggling for liberation and freedom of other people. She could have given the two sides thing. She could have said, we believe in Jewish safety. We have to struggle against anti-Semitism. We also have to fight for Palestinian human rights. Right? That's kind of one of those liberal democratic answers, right? Saying a whole bunch without saying nothing. But she went straight for the necks of the protesters, and then later on in this clip, she went straight for the historical narrative. And this is how Zionism continues to perpetuate itself or regenerate itself, is that dominant narratives about what's going on are left unchecked, either by news outlets that don't know the difference and pundits who are engaged in sophistry, or willful or just ignorance. And maybe not even willful ignorance, maybe just ignorance. Maybe people really just don't know. Maybe people really believe that these people have been fighting forever, and maybe people really believe that Israel and Palestine is a religious fight, and maybe people really believe that this would all be over if Hamas would just put their guns down. Right? All these sort of talking points. It's just not true, but it is what it is. Anyway, y'all, I am going to leave it alone. I'm going to leave it alone. But I do want to just bring up one more quick story before we go. And it's for you Boston Celtics fans out there. It's for you Boston Celtics fans out there. I'm sorry, my light went out. Are y'all Boston Celtics fans out there? I hope not. I'm from Philadelphia. So I hate Boston just as a birthright. Somebody asked how tall I am. I'm 5'10". So I'm not like short compared to like the average person. I'm just short compared to tall people. That makes sense. That's how I would describe it. Right? 5'10", I think is the average American's 5'9", so I'm 5'10". So I'm not short compared to American, but I'm far from tall. Anyway, let's talk about an NBA player who is sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Whew. All right, y'all, it's time for a sad story about a former NBA champion. Glenn Big Baby Davis has been sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for a fraud scheme. The former Boston Celtic was sentenced to 3.5 years for an alleged scheme to defraud the NBA's healthcare benefits plan. He was convicted of the crime back in November, and he was sentenced recently. This was not a small scheme. 18 former players, 21 people overall, have been sentenced now for filing false medical claims to receive money from the NBA players' health and benefit welfare plan. Now, along with the prison sentence, again, 3.5 years, that ain't no joke for an actual NBA star. They usually give him slaps on the wrist. So the NBA clearly takes his bread serious. Davis was ordered to pay $80,000 in restitution, complete 3 years of supervised release. And the supervised release includes financial management classes and drug treatment. Now, according to the reports, Glenn Davis, also known as Big Baby, was not the ringleader of this. The ringleader was Terrence Williams, also a former NBA player. And they roofed him. They gave him 10 years. Now, he got 10 years, Terrence Williams. Big Baby Davis, Glenn Big Baby Davis got 3 years, and then everybody else got considerably less time. So there's lessons here. There's analysis here that needs to happen. First of all, the first thing for me, when I see people commit crimes or acts of harm or acts of dishonesty, the first thing I do is ask, what drove them to make this choice, right? I operate from a restorative framework. I don't ask who did it and how do we punish them. I ask who was harmed and how do we make them whole. So the NBA was harmed, the players union was harmed, the pension was harmed. For those that don't understand, NBA players, every year that you play, you gain another year of seniority and another year counted toward a pension. If you play the minimum number of the minimum number of years in the NBA, which is 3 years, you get you're fully vested. That's the best way to put it, right? In other words, if you play for 3 years, you get something. Every year that you play, you get something more. Once you hit 10 seasons, you get the max. So like LeBron's not going to get a gajillion dollars because he's playing 55,000 years. Nobody's been as good for this long, by the way. LeBron, you might not think he's a GOAT, but he's definitely the best for the longest. In other words, nobody's been this good for this long. That's sidetracking, no extra charge for that. NBA players have a pension plan, 3 years, they're vested, 10 years, they get the max. That is an attempt to create some kind of financial stability for players who really don't have a lot of economic resources once the career is over. The pension plan started in 1965, so there was an attempt at kind of collective organizing around that time. You got to thank people like Oscar Robertson for that, by the way. He's not just the triple-double god, he's also a fighter for players' rights, as was Curt Flood in baseball. But in basketball, you got not just Oscar Robertson, you got Bill Russell, you got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you got others, right? Anyway, the NBA careers are short. NBA careers are only 3 years, I believe, is the average NBA career. I believe it's three and a half years, but it's certainly not long. Actually, I just looked. The average NBA career is actually 4.5 years now. The average NFL career is a little shorter. So when you're playing professional sports, don't think about LeBron. Don't think about Tom Brady. Those are extraordinary outliers for all the reasons. If you're in the NFL, know you're going to play an average of 3.3 years. And if you're a running back, that number drops to 2.6 years. If you're an NBA player, know you're only going to play for 4.5 years. Then you're going to bounce around and you're going to be gone. So all of your money that you make has to last for the rest of your life in terms of the money you make as a pro athlete. Now, some people say, well, why are we holding them to a different standard? Everybody else goes out and works. That's true. But even if we're thinking about this from a kind of political economic analysis, or even a Marxist would say, yeah, but this NBA player, Glenn Davis or whoever, is generating billions, if not trillions of dollars for the league. And so they're even further exploited. They're even more alienated from their labor. That's the argument. That makes sense? That makes sense. So in order to really understand why somebody like Glenn Davis or these other NBA players who committed these acts of fraud might have done it, you got to kind of understand that NBA players don't get a lot of time. They don't get a lot of time to play. They are often preyed upon by agents, by lawyers, by financial advisors, etc. Now, Glenn Davis was not the kind of person I'm describing. Glenn Davis played 9.5 years in the NBA. Glenn Davis was an NBA champion on the Boston Celtics. He was that one championship that people in Boston act like somehow counts for more championships, like they were a dynasty when they won one ring. They lost the next year to the Spurs. whatever. Point is, Glenn Davis played a lot. He played a lot. Now, um, uh, by the end of his career, he was making minimums, and he didn't enter the era where everybody's getting 30, 40, 50 million dollars. That's true. He became a journeyman, and he wasn't a particularly special player. You know, if he doesn't play on that Celtics team, I'm not sure if his career is even that long. But Glenn made a decent amount of money. I don't know his. In fact, I'm gonna look it up while I'm sitting here. Glenn Davis's career earnings were $34 million. Now, some of y'all are like, look, how the hell do you squander $34 million? Again, if you in the NBA, half of it goes to taxes. So now it's 17 million, $16 million for your career. Your agent's going to take millions of that. Your manager is going to take, trainers, all this is going to take millions. You buy a house, you take care of your family. I'm not saying that it's not a lot of money. I'm not saying boohoo for the $33 million guy, but I am saying that it's not what y'all think it is. And then a lot of times, and I know a lot of NBA players, a lot of times they get preyed upon, they get approached by people with get rich quick schemes or long-term investment schemes, both of which often end up taking millions, if not tens of millions of dollars from them. So I see this all the time. After they leave the NBA, many develop addictions, gambling, drugs, alcohol. Those are often devastating. And they don't have the support networks. They don't have the mental health resources. They often don't have things that other people may have access to in other spaces or industries where you're making tens of millions of dollars. So when I look at a case of Glenn Big Baby Davis or the other couple dozen players that got locked up and convicted, this part of me that's like, come on, y'all already made tens of millions of dollars. Why y'all being greedy? Go get a job. Go launch a podcast. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Go be a head coach at a high school. Like, you can make a living. You're not entitled to make millions. No one's entitled to be a millionaire. Everybody's entitled to a living wage. And as a former NBA player, you can get a living wage. But I do understand how people have lifestyles and arrangements that are dependent upon a certain income level. They're taking care of families. They're taking care of 15 people. They're paying 8 college tuitions. I get how it happens. I do. Believe me, I do. But we got to make better decisions. So I'm not going to defend Big Baby for this, because the other thing is, you're not stealing from the billionaire. I would lose a lot less sleep if I thought Glenn Davis and his cohorts were, sneaking an extra $1 million or $2 million out of the owner of the Clippers or the owner of the Mavericks or whatever, right? If Elon Musk owned the team and you leaned in on the pension plan a little extra, I probably wouldn't say a word. Wouldn't approve of it. I wouldn't approve of it, but I wouldn't be wilding about it, right? But when it comes to the players union, you're actually stealing from the pot of money that your fellow players are drawing from. And I'm sure some of it is insured, but those insurance rates go up when you have mass theft and mass impropriety. My point is, you're not taking from the rich and giving to the poor. You're not taking from the 1% and giving it to the 5%. You're not taking from the 0.001% and giving it to the 1%. You're taking from yourself and particularly your friends, your peers, your teammates, your old heads, your OGs, your youngins. You're taking their money. And so it's indefensible at a certain level. But what I want to say as we conclude is, let's also go deeper. That's what night school is all about. Let's go deeper. I don't think it's enough to just say these guys are just greedy. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's more accurate to say some of them are greedy. Some of them are just bad people. But there's also a very predatory and exploitative economic arrangement in pro sports that drives players to make these kinds of terrible choices. And if you think they're bad in the NBA, wait till you get to the WNBA, where women athletes are even further alienated from their labor. Caitlin Clark, maybe the greatest women's basketball player we've ever seen. I'm about to make my producer mad. Make $75,000 a year. Now, $75,000 a year is a great salary. It's a living wage salary, but people are making billions off of her. Yes, I know she has endorsements and stuff, but I'm talking about if she didn't get those, if she didn't want those, she would be out there doing a job for $75,000 that's generating literally billions over the course of her career. Same thing with Michael Jordan, right? And yes, I'm comparing Caitlin Clark to Michael Jordan. Be mad at somebody else, not me. I don't care. All right, family, we're going to run, but I want to take one. We took an office hours question at the top of the show. I'm going to bookend it with an office hours show. I'm sorry, I'm going to bookend it with the office hours question at the end of the show, maybe one or two. Somebody said, who the what you ever seen? That's not the office hours question. I'm going to take more than that, but y'all be mad, yo. Y'all be mad. So the office hours question is who to what you ever seen. That person is asking me why I say that Caitlin Clark may be the best women's basketball player we've ever seen. So let me be very clear. Caitlin Clark's cement is still very, very wet. Caitlin Clark is nowhere near ready to be analyzed in historic context. Okay? Too far. But if we look at her college career, there's absolutely no reason to exclude her from the GOAT conversation. You know, I watched Dawn Staley play. To me, she's bigger, stronger, much better shooter. Not as good a passer. Oh, is it? Yeah, as good a passer, not as good a defender by any stretch. But Caitlin Clark is a beast. Caitlin Clark is the greatest scorer college basketball's ever seen. I mean, that's just a statistical fact. She's the greatest shooter college sports has ever seen. Statistical fact. Now, people say, what about Maya Moore? People say, you know, what about Candace Parker? I think they're all in the conversation too. I don't think they're as high in the conversation. Maya Moore is a beast. But I also say people can look like a beast. I remember back in the day when everybody thought that Mike Bibby was an elite point guard, and Shaq, who was a rival of Bibby's because the Lakers were going back and forth with the Kings back then. He said, you know, he's a Cub Scout, not a Boy Scout. He said, but if Cub Scouts hang with Boy Scouts and do what Boy Scouts do, they can sometimes look like Boy Scouts for a second. At the time, I thought he was talking shit until I watched Mike Bibby play other places. Mike Bibby is a very, very good point guard. He was a very, very good point guard, but he was not as good as the rest of his team. He was not as good as, you know, Stojakovic and Divac and Chris Webber, obviously, and so forth and so on. So there's a way that playing with elite players raises your level of play. When you look at a team like UConn or Tennessee or South Carolina, they're not Cub Scouts. They're full-grown scouts. So if you're good and you play with elite bomb squads, then you can look even better. You can look even better than you already are. So I don't doubt that Maya Moore is an all-time college player. But what would Caitlin Clark look like on UConn? What would she look like under Gino Auriemma? You know, etc. You know, I'm sorry about the baby's crying. You know, what would she look like under Gino Auriemma? You know, what would she look like playing with Cheryl Swoops? Cheryl Swoops to me, elite. Cheryl Miller to me is the GOAT of women's basketball. You know, I'm just saying Caitlin Clark could become that thing. Anyway, family, I got to run. The baby's crying out. I think you can hear him. I want to thank you all for watching. Please hit the like button. Please, please, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button so that you can get updates. And of course, family, please hit that join button. We need your support. This channel is driven without a check. It's driven without mainstream media support. It's driven without a billionaire supporting me. It's all me out of my pocket without a media job. So please, family, join, please support, please come through and become a member of the family. We'll see you later. Peace.